Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How you doing?
Very well, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited about today's session. I'm excited.
I am too. This is such a troublesome area.
Yes.
The troublesome triad.
Yes, ma'am.
It is such the root of so many pain issues, so much discomfort for clients.
Yep.
And honestly, maybe I'm being a little bit obnoxious, but it's not always that hard to manage that piece of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I find like there's some kind of simple ways to work with some of that can really make a huge difference using relatively simple tools and timeframes for a client.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the triad we're talking about, the troublesome triad is going to be hip flexor, piriformis, and quadratus lumborum. And these are three areas that are always considered bad guys. Anytime you hear someone talk about it, it's always put into a negative context. Oh, it's my hip flexor. Oh, it's my piriformis. Oh, it's my QL. And it's like, okay, these are all very dynamic muscle units. These are things that involve a lot of what we do every day in just normal motion. And when one of them is shut off, or one of them isn't working properly, or one of them is in spasm, or it throws everything else into chaos. So I thought, you know what? Let's cover all three. Let's talk about it. We'll break it down a little bit and then talk about how they work sort of in conjunction with each other and how they do affect the lumbar spine and low back pain. So why don't we start first with anatomy? Let's start first with the hip flexor.
All right. So hip flexors, there's many of them. Mm-hmm. The key ones that we talk about, and actually the reason a lot of these are part of the troublesome triad is that they're multi-joint muscles. Yep. They don't just cross one joint, they cross multiple joints. So the hip flexor we're talking about is primarily the psoas major, right? Psoas major attaches to the front of the vertebra, transverse processes, and the intervertebral discs of T12, L1, L2, L3, L4, sometimes L5, depending who you talk to.
Yep.
Right? Then it comes across the front of the pelvis, right on top of the iliacus, merges with the iliacus, creating that connection between a one-joint hip flexor, the iliacus, and this multi-joint, I'm not even just going to call it a hip flexor, the psoas major.
Right.
To attach the lesser trochanter inside the femur.
And what's interesting about this, that I guess no one really talks, everybody hears hip flexor, so immediately they go into the hip joint. They only talk about the hip. And it wasn't until I, learned more about anatomy, and even in anatomy, they didn't really go into much detail about this, but how important is it that the psoas does attach to the lumbar spine? It's huge.
It's the only thing in the front of the lumbar spine, except for the crushes of the diaphragm that come down to only to L3 on one side, on the right side, and L2 on the left side.
Yeah.
So it's the only muscular support we have for the front of the spine. Everything else is in the back, and there's like 17 layers in the back, but there's very few layers in the front.
Yeah. And for those people who have issues that they shouldn't be doing extension work, they shouldn't go into arching their back, these muscles, the psoas, when it contracts, especially bilaterally, will help put you into more extension. So the tighter that is, which is why we see people say they have a tight hip flexor, and yes, they may be pitched forward at the hip, they also oftentimes have that lordosis that goes along with it. And people aren't addressing that part of it. They only address the lower portion in a hip stretch, in a hip flexor stretch, without really thinking about the lumbar.
And I'm going to get even a little more complicated here, because the psoas major attaches to each of those vertebrae in the lumbar. Depending on the shape of the lumbar curve, those muscles can respond quite differently. So one thing that I'll say there is if, for example, that lumbar curve is extremely stiff, or there's just not a lot of mobility there, then the psoas will generally pull the entire lumbar forward into extension. right? Increase the lordosis, if you will, along typically with flexing the hip, right? But that's not always the case. If somebody has either a looser lumbar or a lumbar that is flatter, right, less curve, then I've experienced this with some clients. Then the psoas actually acts as a sequential flexor of the lumbar spine.
Very
So
interesting.
if, in Pilates, if you're doing a roll up or more commonly a roll down or the roll up, because I'm going to do the concentric action of that, you can sometimes really get into almost segmentally activating the psoas, or that's how it feels anyway. What's happening, from a musculoskeletal condition, I'm not really sure, but it feels like you can articulate one vertebra at a time into flexion by activating different branches of that psoas, different segments of it, if you will.
Interesting. I always put that as, when you think of a roll-up, for instance, I always thought, and again, could be a fallacy on my end, or if I'm just dealing with people who have relatively stiffer spines that naturally go into that extension when the hip flexor gets tight. When they do try and do a roll-up, they usually don't have that capability of curling the spine, and they're yanking from the lower end of the psoas iliacus connection. So that's sort of yanking it up, and these are the people who do have a harder time, like I say, doing more of a curl. They're the ones that sort of come up from the hip joint itself. And and that could go to what you were saying with them being just having stiffer spines.
Right. So I call it the Frankenstein.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And in Pilates, we do roll ups a lot. We can curl up and roll up.
Yep.
And you'll see the thoracic spine goes into flexion, and you'll see like more or less articulation of the cervical, then into the thoracic, and then it kind of like the whole thing comes up as a chunk.
Yep.
Right, because the psoas basically pulls on the front of those lumbar vertebrae and lifts the whole thing up as a piece.
Yep.
And that's very typical. But the reason that this occurred to me, or one of the reasons, was I was teaching in China. And again, this is a broad generalization of structural differences across different cultures and stuff. But in China, in general, the spine is a bit flatter. There's typically a little bit less of a lordotic curve. There's not always as much gluteal development. Again, this is broad categorizations. And I watched a room of 75 people who had never done Pilates before do a roll up with actually articulating the lumbar spine into flexion. Which again, if I've got a mixed, American version in a classroom, that's going to be about 2 people, maybe that can do that, or not, or nobody can. And I was literally like, why is this so different? And then having worked again a lot in Asia, looking at just how the spinal mechanics are different. If you've got a steeper curve, you're going to get a pull. Let's say the psoas attaches. Let's say you've got a curve in the lumbar that has an apex at L2. So the deepest part of the extension is at L2, or the second lumbar vertebra. Then everything from L2, L3, L4 is going to pull that whole thing up. Right. So if you're going to roll up, it's going to pull it up as a unit, create maybe potentially some shearing forces into the lumbar spine. Whereas if that spine does not have that deep lordotic curve, I just find that the mechanics are quite different. And there was a study I read a million years ago that really spoke to how the position of the spine directly influences the tone in the different fibers of the psoas, both the deep fibers and the more superficial fibers. And you can kind of see that if somebody's really stiff there, they're going to have that. The psoas are going to pull that lumbar forward into more extension. And you'll often see along with that they're slightly flexed at the hips. They may or may not be anteriorly tipped in the pelvis. And all that goes together.
Right.
But depending on the spinal structure and the spinal mobility, that could be different.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd say 95% of the people that I work with have much more of that steeper lordotic curve, either with sway back posture or just a generalized larger lordosis. So they do have that almost natural anterior tilt, tight hip flexor, can't seem to release it, can't seem to stretch it without, going into a deep lumbar extension, which I hate to say, I see that taught constantly at gyms everywhere I go, where you go into a lunge sort of position. and
Yep.
you're stretching it, but what happens is they start arching their back, and I'm thinking, you're not really stretching much.
No, exactly. Because you're basically taking the two ends of the muscle, right? And you
Yep.
may be moving the femur behind you. So
Yep.
the trochanter is going behind you, but the spine goes forward.
Yep,
And you're not
exactly.
necessarily changing the length between those two attachment points, which is
Exactly.
what you need for a stretch, right?
And that's
Yeah.
sometimes how I'll teach it with a client is I'll let them go into what's natural. I say, how much of a stretch do you feel? And they'll say,
Yeah.
oh, a little bit,
Not much.
little bit.
Yeah.
I'll say, okay. And as tight as they are, I'm like, you should be feeling a ton. And of course, then you put them into a flatter back position or a posterior tilt and have them move just a little bit. And all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, I feel this so much more.
Right.
So
That's what you mean.
yeah, you're creating that anchor basically with the lumbar
Yeah.
spine. So you're
Yeah.
holding one end of the muscle while you're stretching the other instead of letting it
Right,
move.
which is what you have to do, right? If you
Yep.
actually want to stretch a muscle, you've got to stabilize one end
Yep.
so the other end can do its movement.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That is interesting. That is interesting. Because we see a lot of people who have sort of locked up hip flexors. Recently, I
Yeah.
went through this a couple of weeks ago. Just woke up, must have slept a little funny. Woke up and I was like, man, it is so tight. And it didn't want to let go. It just was like a ball. And I needed to get in there and do a little bit of release work myself and to get it to relax because stretching wasn't doing the job. So I actually needed some manual work. And, fortunately, you can do that with a small ball if you know where to place it. And that really did seem to help release it. But it took probably a week before everything sort of relaxed and let go. So I do see that some people do have that chronically tight psoas. And I'm using the word psoas instead of iliopsoas because I don't often see it in the iliacus as much. I normally see it in the psoas area.
Yeah.
And that's the part that, again, will pull you into extension, which can cause other issues if you've got, other issues like stenosis or whatever. So, yeah, doing a little bit of manual work, if you can have someone do manual work, it's a great way to get that to let go. But also just using a small ball, anything you can do to release it seems to help.
Absolutely. One thing that I just always caution people on is because releasing this yourself is a little tricky.
It is.
It's not because you really have to put a small ball, or sometimes we'll use like the edge of a roller.
Yep.
Basically right inside the iliac crest, right inside the ASIS, and kind of relax into it and hopefully get that muscle to relax.
Yep.
And typically manual pressure helps. It's very hard to do that amount of manual pressure yourself. Some people can, but it's a funny angle to go in on. So manual therapy helps a lot there. And one thing I sometimes caution on that is if there's any kind of inflammatory issue in the abdomen, if there's endometriosis, if there's irritable bowel issues, if there's other kinds of things,
Yep.
I want to be really cautious with that because I'm not quite sure what all I'm poking in there, but I'm poking a lot of things.
I was just going to say that's huge as a contraindication for females, I find especially.
Yeah.
I had a client who needed release work there. I taught her how to do it with a small ball. She got into position and she literally said that all of a sudden she goes, whoa. And I was thinking, ooh, did we get a release? And she said, it felt like rushing warm water in that area. And I'm like, ooh, that's I don't like that. That's
right.
That's
a little
okay.
scary.
It's a little scary. But I said, oh, do you feel okay? She goes, no, I feel fine in it. And she had fibroid. She had ovarian cyst is what she had. She had an ovarian cyst, and it literally, the doctor said.
Did she rupture the cyst?
She ruptured the cyst.
Wow.
Because she went to the doctor. I said, you know what? I want you to go into your OB. I want you to get this checked out because this is not a normal situation.
Right. This is weird.
This is weird. And she felt fine afterwards. But when she went in, the doctor said, yeah, we can see you have signs that it was there and you ruptured it. So that's something that she didn't know she had. So you do have to be very careful with this.
Yes,
you do.
Exactly.
And I am going to caution, there is a new tool out there that I've seen being advertised throughout social media land, which it's very pointy. It's probably 4 to 6 inches tall, and it's quite pointy. And you're supposed to put it underneath where your psoas is and lie down on it. And it looks a little bit on the large side to me. It's very pinpointy.
Right.
It does not look comfortable at all. It looks like a torture device. Some people swear by it, but I'm going to caution, unless you know what you're doing, there's a lot of things in that area that you can really, you don't want to be messing with.
Right.
So I always say, be cautious. Just start
Yes.
light. Start lighter rather than harder, because you don't know what you're poking into.
No, and that's why I start with. I start with a big ball, like a 5-inch, 5-inch
Yeah.
playground ball or something, which is pretty big, pretty broad. Like you're
Yep.
not getting pokey pressure on anything.
Yep.
You're just and typically, for that kind of thing, a client will typically go like, if it's really, really painful, they won't stay there.
Yes.
Right? There's a certain aversion if it's really painful, and oftentimes it's just uncomfortable, and that's different than like, oh, this really feels really awful. I'm gonna move. And I start with something kind of big and broad. And I also say, if I'm teaching somebody to do that, I'm going to have you set the timer for 15
Yeah.
seconds. And I'm going to have you just do 15 seconds. Like you go on, you breathe 3 or 4 times, you come off it.
Yep.
See how you do that day, the next day, etc. Then we sort of slowly build that up. I'm really cautious with starting that, although it can be incredibly valuable. That's the challenge, right? If it
Yes.
works, it's like a miracle,
Yep.
really valuable. You just got to approach it with a lot of caution.
How I teach this is I use a ball that's about 4 inches round.
Yep.
And it's got some firmness to it, but it's also a little bit squishy.
Yes, me too. Yep.
And I tell them, okay, find the ASIS between the ASIS and your belly button. Put it in that area and gently lay yourself down on it. See how it feels. If there is no pain or discomfort, you're probably not in the right spot. Because if anybody's ever had palpation done properly to the psoas, you know when you're on it.
It's not subtle. It is not subtle.
But one way that I have discovered that really you can tell if you're on it or not is if they're on a spot that makes them go, oh, yep, I feel this, but they're not 100% sure, is take your toe, sort of dig it into the ground of the same foot, and with your quadricep, not with your hip, with your quadricep, elevate your knee. Because basically you're going to be stretching that hip flexor just slightly. And if you're on the psoas, you're going to feel the stretch increase, and you're going to feel the intensity go up from like a 6 to a 7, not to a 10. Mm-hmm. And when they do that, they're like, oh yeah, that went up. I said, okay, we know you're on it. If you're not on it, if you're just in another area that may be tender, because let's face it, how often do we poke ourselves in the abdomen?
Right.
So it may be tender in general.
Right.
But, that way they're like, oh yeah, I feel that. And I may have them pump it up and down a few times, a little active, isolated, release type work. Just to get it. And then I could say, okay, let's move up or down slightly and sort of follow the track. You can only go so high because it goes so deep in the abdomen to the lumbar spine.
Yeah, you run into your ribs pretty quick, but yeah.
Yeah. But that's one way that I can tell them if they're on it or not, first of all, but also get them to gauge. And I tell them intensity, 5 to 6. I'm not looking for a 10. If you're hitting a 10, back off. Back way off. So.
Yeah. So there's part 1 of our troublesome triad.
Yes, that's the first bit.
That's the first bit. Now, one other step on that is thinking about like a lot of it for me too is where does that come from, right? Why does that get tight?
Yes.
And what do I need to do to make that less tight? So one of the things that is a general comment I'll say about the psoas, the quadratus lumborum, and the piriformis is all of those will try to act as postural stabilizers if the core is not really doing its job very well, is how I put it. I'm not just entirely true, but that's how it feels. And these guys are not designed to do that. It's not really, they're not mechanically in the right position for it, and they're not really designed for it, but they will do their best to help. They're very helpful.
Yes.
And so with that in mind, what I want to do a lot of times with these muscles is, yes, I want to release them, and then I want to try to make them dynamically strong within their full range. Right? Because what does the psoas do? The psoas basically lives at a right angle, holding you in a sitting position for many people for multiple hours a day.
Yep.
Right? So it starts to get short. So this gets into another piece of muscle spasms is it starts to get short, or at least it just has to hold that position for hours and hours and hours. And when a muscle has to hold a position relatively statically for a long period of time, one of its strategies is to lay down more fascia, thicken the fascia within the muscle, right? So that basically it's stabilizing the muscles. I think of it as putting rebar inside your concrete, right? It's like the fibers just get thicker. And the thing about fibers getting thicker is fibers are not, they don't have a lot of good blood supply. They're not nourishable in the same way. They don't get nourishment in the same way. They tend to be more just fibers that are living there doing their thing. And so they will tend to decrease the blood supply to the muscle over time just by replacing muscle tissue with fibrous tissue.
Now, when we're talking about fascia for the fascia uninitiated out there, are we talking about the thoracolumbar fascia?
In this case, we're really talking about the intermuscular fascia.
Okay.
Or I should call it the intramuscular fascia.
Okay, so the fascia
the
within
fascia
it.
that is within the muscle tissue itself.
Gotcha.
Right. So it's not so much the outside or even the connection between the muscles, but it really is what's happening inside the muscle tissue itself. Every muscle cell is surrounded by a little tiny bit of fascia, and then that makes a little bundle, and that's surrounded by more fascia, et cetera, until you get the whole muscle that has a big pile of fascia around it. So it's really that fascia within the muscle. So those muscle fibers get a little thicker fascia coat, if you will. And that, again, is going to decrease the amount of blood supply, decrease the amount of nourishment the tissue gets, and make it more likely to spasm.
Yep.
And the way around that, at least in my mind, is movement.
Yes.
Right? Move that muscle through its full range of motion as much as you can, because that will decrease the likelihood of that fibrous tissue building up and increase the stimulation of circulation within the muscle, which makes it healthier.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, something that you told me a long, long time ago that I never thought about. Okay, I never really thought about this, but you brought up the fact that the psoas really likes to contract the most, or at its greatest muscular advantage, is when the hip joint is actually bent to 90 degrees and above. So bringing that knee forward and above the 90-degree mark, above horizontal, really is what's going to separate the iliacus from the psoas, and the psoas does more work.
Well, I wouldn't say the iliacus and the psoas, because those guys really work together as hip flexors. But what it does is those then take the job above 90 rather than the rectus femoris and the sartorius and the tensor fasciae lata. The more superficial hip flexors don't have a good mechanical advantage above 90, which the iliopsoas does. And I'm combining that into the iliopsoas at that point.
Okay.
So yeah. So that's where, like, doing a high march, for example, right? Getting that knee above that 90-degree level, which people don't ever want to do in their marches, if you've noticed. But that's going to get more into that iliopsoas and that psoas major than into the superficial hip flexors. It'll start to get that a little bit stronger.
I guess my thought was always with the iliopsoas complex is when you lift that knee up, you're shortening the iliacus so much that it's not really getting the same amount of contractile tissue as you are a much longer muscle like the psoas that can continue to contract, which is why in my mind I was thinking
that makes sense.
It does a little bit more work, but again, we haven't done EMG studies, so I can't say for sure. But it is something to think about. Even what I have some clients do is just sitting in a chair doing high knee marches in a chair or on a ball. On a ball is a big challenge, because lifting one leg, you're obviously going to have a balance component, so you're working your core a lot more. But it's super challenging, and I can't tell you how many people, you get them to that point, they lift up, and you can see in their face, they're like, oh! And not only is it difficult, but there might be a little bit of discomfort even.
Yes. Yep, and a lot of weakness.
Yeah.
I've had so many clients. I often do the seated, high march, basically, because it's the easiest way to do it. They can really feel their pelvis is staying relatively neutral, or I can manage their pelvis in that position, and it's the easiest version, basically. At least that's still gravity resistant. And it's like, wow, they will do, and sometimes you'll find they can do 10 on one side and they'll do 4 on the other side, and they'll get pain in the front of the hip. Just because they're literally, and that's just weakness in that case. A lot of times they're just that weak there. So this tends to be extremely underutilized, this particular range of motion for most people.
Now, would you ever use the Pilates chair to assist with that if someone had a little bit of lack of strength or lack of endurance, where you can sit on the chair, put your feet on the pedals,
absolutely,
and actually have a little bit of assistance in that lifting? I'm thinking for our older clients. We have a lot of 65, 70, 75-year-olds who don't lift their legs very much when they walk, and they need to. So I've used it that way in the past to de-weight their legs a little bit. I was just curious if that was something that you did as well.
Yeah, all the time, because you don't know the chair, like the feet are on a pedal and you're sitting on like a chair, and essentially that pedal pushes the legs up or assists with what would be hip flexion if you're sitting on it like that, and then you get the concentric or the push down of the hamstrings basically and a little bit of the quads. You go down and you kind of come up and you come down, and that does de-weight that a bit. The other thing too that I'll play with on that is I will play with timing. So I'll have them go down fast and up slow. Right. So I'm kind of like using the back of the leg to push down and some part of the quad, but not the hip flexor part of the quad, or the vasti a little bit there. And then as they come up, kind of slow, do the eccentric phase of that hip flexion above 90.
Nice.
Because we know that eccentric phase is oftentimes a really good strength builder rather than the concentric phase. I do some concentric things as well, but I really like the eccentric phase on that one with the assistance. Just slow it down. Come up as high as you comfortably can, slow, and then push down, and come up slow. And as you're like a push down 1, and then 2, 3, 4 up, and then down 1, 2, 3, 4 up, something like that.
Something that I'm glad we started with the hip flexor and with the iliopsoas is because so often we think about what muscles do we train on a regular basis.
Yeah.
We focus on the posterior a lot. And with good reason.
Yep.
With good reason.
Yes, absolutely.
Glutes have a
it can be
tendency to shut
neglected
down.
as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you really watch people working out in the gym, I almost never see anybody do any hip flexor strengthening. It's something that they almost want to avoid. And when asked about it, they're going to say, oh, they're already tight. And I have to remind people a tight muscle can actually be a very, very weak muscle at the same time.
And hip flexors, almost always.
Yeah. And that's something that we need to focus in on, even if it's only one exercise here or there. Like you say, high marches, because that's also going to test balance. Does it test coordination? That tests a lot of things.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of my older clients, I may have them do a sideways walk over, 6-inch hurdles or something like that, something small, or even just a towel rolled up on the ground. But I'll say, lift your leg as high as you can as you go over. And they don't need to know why. But you watch the first few repetitions, it's up pretty high. Then it starts getting lower. Then it starts getting lower. And before long,
then they start hitting it.
They're hitting
right?
it. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I even do them facing a step and just have them do a tap on top of it. A lot of times I'll put like a ball on the ground and have them tap on top of the ball because the ball will move a little bit. So they got to chase it a little bit. So it takes it more
different angles.
Yeah, different angles, takes it more three-dimensionally just so they can get a little bit more of those angles, but also for balance and stuff like that. But I think these are great ways that we can sneak it in where they don't even know they're doing it.
Absolutely. Those are again, super simple. All those things are really simple. And I've given clients things like when you're at your desk, because I have a lot of clients who sit a lot, so when you're at your desk, just set your alarm for every hour or whatever, and then just do 10 high marches and sitting in your chair.
Yep.
Sitting upright on your sit bones, stay balanced, and just 10 high marches. And it makes a difference pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It's been my experience. Because again, it's typically something that people haven't done anything of. Right? They haven't done any, and then I always say if you start from zero, you make progress quickly. Exactly. And many people have never lifted their hip above 90 degrees or not much. So any work at all, it makes a big difference.
Something else to think about for those more fitness inclined. When someone's doing a squat, what muscle is really helping when you're descending into the squat that helps your hip joint basically work properly? It's the hip flexor.
Yeah.
So a lot of times what I will cue, I've got a machine much like a reformer. I use the reformer as well for this, but another machine where they're lying down so it imitates a squat more. And it's done with...
The shuttle?
Yeah, the shuttle.
Or whatever.
Shuttle MVP.
Yeah.
So it's got rubber resistance. And I will have them do the eccentric focus on bringing the knees toward the chest slowly.
Yes.
So changing that mindset a little bit and reminding that muscle how to work that way, and then take them into a squat, take them into a box sit or something like that, and remind them, make sure you're hinging from the hip. Instead of just stick your butt back, because that really doesn't do the job. Hinge from the hip. Think about bringing your knees up as you sit your butt back or down, however people want to cue that. And I find that gets them into much better mechanics. And I've actually taken some people who have had labral issues where their hips aren't working properly, and it's begun to work with that a little bit because, again, you're reminding part of the joint, hey, I need to keep the hip properly placed here too.
Nice.
So
Nice.
it can help for that.
One other thing that I bring up, especially in terms of the psoas and the iliacus, is if you watch runners, and again, I tend to do this a lot. I walk on a couple trails, and there's a whole bunch of runners that are always going by. It's like Saturday morning, and I watch them run, and what I notice is a whole lot of the runners do very little hip flexion at all.
Yeah.
They really don't drive that leg forward. They do a lot with like that push off in the hamstring, like the back of the leg is really the propulsion,
Yep.
but there's none of that pull forward with the leg. And that's also where I see that kind of pretty common weakness in, these are fit people. These guys are, clearly doing a lot of running, but they're still missing that component of it. So from a performance side, not just a pain reduction side. And I always think of, Usain Bolt, or you look at a really good, especially sprinters, you watch them, that drive of that hip flexor forward is huge.
Yep.
That hip flexor goes up to 90 degrees. It isn't just way down there doing 20 degrees of flexion. It's driving forward. And that's where you really see the power and the speed. So for your performance or any clients as well, something to think about.
Cycling as well. If you think about working the whole pedal cycle rather than just the pushing down. And that's how you take a beginner and make them better, as you say, okay, focus on the pull, focus on the pull. And once you get into toe clips or even the toe cage, you can focus on that. It's like, oh my gosh, this makes you much more efficient, but they get tired really fast.
Right, because they haven't done that before.
Exactly.
Presumably. Yeah, that's not where they're strong.
Yeah, so that's something else. Just anytime you can add that, it really does help for performance, we find, or I find.
Yeah, absolutely. One last thing that I want to say about the hip flexors, particularly the psoas, is yes, we want to work on releasing it, on stretching it, stretching if you're in a lunge, for example, again, that posterior tilt, that like bringing the bottom of the pelvis forward is often going to increase the stretch. Sometimes reaching the arm up or even doing a side bend away from the side will increase the stretch. So ways to accelerate that. But the other thing is, we want to think about with that area is the rectus femoris and tightness in the quads.
Yep.
Because there's tightness in the hip flexors, which is deep, and there's sometimes the rectus femoris is actually the culprit that is limiting the range of motion there too. So always making sure that you're doing both iliopsoas stretches and rectus femoris stretches, or at least identifying which part of it is tighter or which part of it may be the troublemaker, because either one can be a troublemaker there.
And I find that in the kneeling lunge stretch for hip flexor, if you tuck the toe under, go into dorsiflexion, it pulls that rectus femoris a lot more. And I've had people just do that and think, oh my gosh, because they'll tell me, I'm not feeling much anymore, dorsiflex. They're like, holy moly. I said, okay, now we got to deal with the rectus femoris as well.
Right.
So it does pull that part of it in as well.
Yeah, or with the kneeling lunge, the classic there too is just sit up.
Yeah.
I'm really tight. My rectus femoris always had been. So I'm kind of like, I'm hanging out over that front leg.
Yep.
And if I just even attempt to bring my torso up right, it's like, okay, I get it now. Right? Like, ouch.
Yeah. Yep. Very good. Very good. So that is our hip flexor. Okay. Now, just so everybody knows, we're going to be doing this in multiple parts. Okay. So we're going to cover hip flexor today. We're going to now get into the quadratus lumborum. When we're finished with all three, we're going to combine all of them and see how they work in conjunction with one another, especially when you have clients who have sort of conditions here and there, whether low back pain, hip pain, labral tears, all that kind of thing. We can deal with all of that. So that'll be part of part 2. So now, let us talk about the quadratus lumborum.
All right.
And this is one I don't like. I don't like it.
Not your friend.
Not my friend, man. I have had issues with mine probably for the last 10 years, chronically tight on one side. No matter how much I release it, no matter how much I literally get up in the morning and have a routine where I have to release it, stretch it, release it, stretch it. And then I can start walking and I'm fine. But if I don't do it right away, that just tightens up and it gets cranky the rest of the day.
Yes.
So, and I'm thinking, man, it's been how many years that I've been dealing with this? But you know what? That's my cross to bear, so to speak. But let's talk about the anatomy, and then we'll get down into the nitty-gritty with it.
So the quadratus lumborum is interesting because it connects our 12th rib, so the bottom of our rib cage, goes along the transverse processes of the lumbar vertebra, again, often skipping 5, and then goes along the iliac crest.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, it is a multi-joint muscle.
Mm-hmm.
It also is connecting our rib cage, our spine, and our pelvis. Right? And those can be moving in a variety of different ways relative to each other.
And I think that's what people are missing. Every time I've seen this drawn in anatomy books, all you see are a lot of the fibers basically saying, oh, it goes from the 12th rib down to the hips, down to the pelvis. And it's like, no, you're missing a huge component.
Huge component.
And every single vertebrae is its own joint. So you're talking about a multi-level muscle. And if any of those have dysfunction, it can affect this muscle.
And it's the same way with the psoas. So bringing this into the QL, right? These guys both, the psoas actually attaches to the lumbar discs. Mm-hmm. There's connections of its fibers to the lumbar disc. So if there is a disc problem, if there is a nerve pinch, if there is any of those kinds of things, those nerves go directly to or through or into these muscles, either the psoas or the QL. So if there is any kind of low back, pathology going on that's going to influence either the discs or the nerves, then those muscles are going to go into some kind of trouble. They'll either shut off, or they'll go into spasm, or they will be reacting in some way to that nervous stimulation.
Yeah. And something that I found interesting that I didn't even learn when I was doing pre-med studies was that the fibers run 3 different directions of the QL. So they go from the ribs to the pelvis, they go from the ribs to the vertebrae, and then they go from the vertebrae to the pelvis. So they're actually running 3 different ways to give us incredible support, incredible dynamic stability. But man, when something goes wrong, something can go really wrong.
So when any one of those fiber angles, for whatever reason, posture, habit, injury, structural issues, gets particularly tight, like one of those, and you really feel, you can probably feel it somewhat on yourself, like that band is what's really tight, right? That direction, whether it's up and over, right? Or I rotate a little this way, you can feel kind of which bands in there get particularly tight. Remember we talked earlier about fibrosis with the psoas. QL is classic. Mm-hmm. The QL2, much like with the psoas, the psoas helps us to sit up, so it's not dynamically used when we're sitting. The QL almost more so has less dynamic range, because most of what it's doing is tiny little micro adjustments between the rib cage and the pelvis. If you're walking, even if you're sitting, you shift your weight to one side, you shift to the other side. That muscle's going this is a funny noise, guys, but it's kind of goes, right? Little tiny contractions to maintain the integrity of that whole area. That's its job. It's a major stabilizer, it's a major stabilizer in that sense. And that's tricky. It doesn't get nourishment. It doesn't get moved through its full range unless you do a pretty big side lift, side bend, side sit up, something like that. Otherwise, it's working in a tiny range all the time and loves to get fibrotic.
And
think
about what we do all the time. You and I are doing it right now. We're just sitting.
Yes.
You're sitting here. My back is against the back of the chair. My QL doesn't have to do a whole lot except for those little bitty movements when I lean a little bit side to side, but I'm not putting it through great ranges of motion like I would be if, let's say, past generations, I was out working in the field. I come from farm stock, so working out in the field, lifting, toting, come from one of those countries that, people, die early but are in the fields until the day they die, just lifting and toting. And
die with their boots on.
Exactly. But that's what our back was meant to do, was to do a lot more work. So when we're sitting here all the time, we give it the opportunity to get fibrotic. We give it the opportunity to limit its range of motion. And then when you ask them to stretch, that muscle's like, excuse me, you want me to do what? Huh?
Say what?
Exactly. And that can be an issue. That can be an
Yeah,
issue. Everybody
absolutely.
thinks, oh, I can easily side bend from side to side. But you look at a lot of people have limitations there, at least to one side or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And weakness too. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I always find that the areas that I find the most obvious imbalance on from side to side is a side sit up
Yeah.
with anybody. You know, I have them do a side sit up on one side and I have them side sit up on the other side with whatever, you know, box or roll or whatever I'm using. And man, one side will be like easy. The other side, they will literally look at me like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
Like they don't even have the coordination on that side.
Uh-huh.
And that's where, again, like how do we make this muscle more nourished, decrease the fibrotic tendency of it,
Mm-hmm.
and decrease the likelihood of spasm. And a lot of it is trying to make it move,
Yeah.
you know, trying to give
Movement.
it some range.
Yeah, movement is always going to be the key. I mean, in case y'all haven't figured it out, movement is the key to a lot of what we're doing here. Just so you know, it is the key to life. But for the QL, I find movement can be really limiting for a lot of people of one side or the other, especially if they have
Yeah.
low back problems, especially if
Yep.
one side is, I'm not going to say spasm because, we all know what a spasm feels like when I can't move. But those almost, I'm going to say a microspasm, a small spasm that they move and it's like, it limits their range of motion. You need to be able to get greater range of motion. You need to be able to stretch and get better mobility there. I find that doing release work, again, with the small ball up against the wall, sort of running it along. I'm not a big fan of running along the spine or the ribs, but along the iliac crest, where a lot of people have a tendency to
Hmm.
feel it the most, that really works really well.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
I try and stay out of the softer areas, the areas that, you don't really necessarily want to put a lot of pressure on your lumbar discs or the lumbar vertebrae or your floating ribs. So, I try and stay off of that area, but you can affect a change by hitting the entire iliac crest and just finding those hot spots where you find something and say, ooh, yeah. And I just lean into it,
Hmm.
breathe into it. And
Yep.
a lot of times people go too fast. They don't go slow enough, you know? And when you find one of those hot spots, oh, you're going to know it.
It's not subtle.
No.
No, and one of the things that I want to say is when you talk about like microspasm, because there's spasms where this is why we call this the troublesome triad, right? Because when you really get a major spasm in the QL or in the psoas, like you can't move. That's the one where the client comes in, the rib cage is over to the right, or they're hunched over,
Yep.
and they're like, I can't straighten up. That's a major spasm. But you guys can do this with me now. Actually, if you find your waist and you put your fingers in your waist, it should be squishy, so relax. I know it's kind of ticklish. And you come around to the back, you'll feel a big band of muscle there. It's a lot of things, but one of it is the edge of your quadratus lumborum. And very often when you put your thumb on there, you'll feel like, this is true in any area that's a little spasmy, it almost feels bruised.
Mm.
Right, you put a thumb in there, and one side feels like it just feels like tissue. The other side feels like a little cranky, a little bit like somebody hit me with a baseball bat. And I'm in the middle of a bruise, and that is that feeling that area is denourished, that it doesn't have enough blood supply. That's got a buildup of gook and glue. The pH has gotten a little bit lower. The ions aren't working the right way that they're supposed to work there, and that causes pain. That increases the nociceptors in the area. So that's one of those things that, again, that's one of the things you'll feel in an area that is in kind of a microspasm, if you want to use that term. Same thing with the piriformis. You put
Mm-hmm.
your thumb kind of in the middle of your butt cheek, if you will, and one side will feel normal, and one side will feel like kind of bruisey. And that's often a sign, again, that those tissues are not getting quite as much stimulation or nourishment or blood flow as they need. And waste products essentially are starting to build up, and it's not getting the circulation it needs.
How I've described it to clients is it feels ropey. Because if you've ever done any manual
Uh-huh.
therapy, and I
Yeah.
have, it feels like you're hitting ropes. I've
Yes.
felt this in multiple areas, especially when you're talking rotator cuff, quadratus lumborum, certain areas you just sort of
Fibrous.
hit and it's like, it just feels like you're hitting
Yes.
ropes, whereas the other side feels, smushy. And it's good.
Yes.
It feels just like it should. It's nice and relaxed. And one side, you can definitely feel those knots. So those knots that we're feeling, that ropiness, that's really sort of malnourished tissue, you're saying?
That's one, I mean, again, that's one
Waste
theory, but
products.
yes, waste products. And it also may be that fibrous tissue has developed in there, right? That you've lost some of that squishy muscle tissue and you're replacing it with, Folgers instant coffee. You're replacing it with fibrous tissue, right? That it used to be nice and soft and squishy and elastic, and suddenly you're just putting ropes in there to keep it stable and to help it to stay as strong as it needs to stay, to do whatever it's trying to do on a postural level.
Which is why we still need to strengthen these muscles, not just do the release
Yes.
work, because
Yes.
the release work is good and it will do some of getting rid of some of those knots, some of that ropiness,
Over
but not
time.
all of it. And it does take a long time. I'm still working on mine every day. It takes a long time, but also if you ignore the strength aspect, the trying to get the strength part of it, you're never really going to develop enough strength to stabilize that area.
Right, because and that's how I think about all of this, is like, if I can really work the psoas dynamically, if I can work the quadratus lumborum dynamically, again, both with release work and with mobility work and with strength, I think of it this way. I just think like all I'm doing when I'm doing, let's say, like a little side sit up or something like that, is I'm taking those tissues and I am compressing them and I'm elongating them, and I'm compressing them and I'm elongating them, and I'm pumping blood into that area.
Yep.
And with that, especially if you do a pretty full range of motion, if that's available to you, then you've also got some of those fibrous tissues are going to be breaking down, right? Because muscles are constantly remodeling. And that means I can actually start to get that range back, and I can replace the fibrous tissue with muscle tissue over time and make that area glide more and be much less prone to trouble.
Let's talk about mobility because, again, y'all know, wrote a book about back pain. The low back has been sort of a area of intense interest for me. I've been focused on this for many, many years and studied a lot. And what I found is stretching the QL, depending on what's going on with their low back, you need to sort of take different approaches on how you're going to stretch the area.
Yes.
Because a lot of people would just say, well, just do a side bend. Well,
Yes.
if I do a side bend in a seated position, but if I have a disc issue of any type, or if I want to drop the knees to the side, lying on my back, doing, or even doing something like telescope arms or a pinwheel, where you're going to stretch out the QL, or starfish, where you're coming across the body. All of those are great exercises and great stretches. But if you do have some disc issues, doing some rotation may not be warranted in that area.
Might irritate things.
Might irritate things. Might not.
Yeah.
It might not.
Yeah.
It's just something to be aware of, that you might want to take it a little slower and not get as aggressive, because we see a lot of people, like, if a little's good, man, a lot's going to be a lot better. Take it a little slower. Go a little less range of motion, sort of approach that range of motion, then say, okay, that's all I can go today, fine. That's all I can go today, fine. Before you know it, you have increased range of motion. You're going to get it to move better. But I find that rotation may be contraindicated depending on what's going on with their body. If they go into that position, that side bend, and they feel a lot of discomfort there, stop.
Back away. Back away.
And I find that there's other ways where you can stretch it. 3 ways that I've done it with clients that I find very good is over a large ball. Where they literally the ball is supporting them and they can literally lie over it. And what I'll do is I'll have them position themselves near a stationary object with their hand, so they can grab it with their hand and let their hips get heavy on the other side of the ball. So you got a little traction going on.
Yeah.
And that can get a little deeper when they're ready for it, because that can be a little aggressive. And again, that's more of an advanced technique. Another way that I do it is side lying.
Yes.
Is just have them lie down on their side and go onto their elbow like they're going to do a side plank, but keep the hips on the ground, straight leg position, and just push up. And
kind of drop the ribs a bit toward the ground, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, so you really are trying to stretch the ribs from the pelvis on that bottom side.
Exactly. And I find that is one of the best ones that seems to be safest for just about all spinal pathologies that I've seen.
Nice.
They don't go into too much of a side bend, so gravity's not pulling them toward the ground. They're pushing up against it a little bit. And it just opens things up, and they can stay there for 15, 30 seconds, 60 seconds. It's not a difficult position because it's not like they're doing a side plank or anything.
Right, right.
And the other one that I will give people is just to hang from that side. If they can find something that they can, a pull-up bar or something like that.
Or a door frame.
Door
or
frame.
In Pilates world, a trap table. And it's just hang on with, so first hang on with both arms, and just very gently unweight your legs. Maybe you just bend the knees.
Exactly.
And then take one arm and just do like a monkey hang, basically.
Exactly.
I also on even a simpler level. So two things. One, to use a big ball. I'll sometimes use a big ball. I'll use a Pilates arc. It's often a really nice way for somebody to just lean over sideways. They can take that arm up and pull that arm a bit. It's pretty gentle. Again, most people can tolerate it. The other one is standing. Reach both arms overhead, hold on to one wrist, and just pull sideways. Sometimes that's pretty mild.
Yeah.
And I'll do that just as a warm up, just kind of like, very gently going into that. And that'll often, again, give a nice, easy way to do that.
Nice, nice. For working the muscle, first of all, I got to tell you a pet peeve. I can't tell you how many times I see this in a gym. Someone goes and they grab two relatively heavy dumbbells, one in each hand, and they start doing side bends.
Oh, yeah, no.
I call that TikTok. Because literally
pure compression.
It's compression because you're holding, I see women do 15, 20 pounders where I'm thinking that's a lot of weight. And you're doing compression on each side. But also as I go to the left, I'm lifting the right. And the left is pulling the right up and vice versa. If you're going to do something where you want to elevate or lift, dumbbell in one side, keeping it lighter is often, a better way that I would do it if I wanted to do a side bend.
Yeah.
But yeah, doing it with both hands, not great. It's just going to be a lot of spinal compression. And as you go to that side, it's even more.
Yeah.
And if you do have a disc pathology, that's one way that you're just going to tick things off.
Pinch the heck out of it. Yeah.
One thing I love to give clients, and it can be very challenging, is just sitting on a ball and doing hip shift side to side.
Yep.
It's simple, but I can make them do it for minutes at a time. And again, as a dynamic stabilizer, we're looking for endurance.
And I do the same thing on a reformer carriage. If it's a 14-inch reformer, sitting on the carriage, no springs.
Yep.
Right, and sitting sideways, feet on the floor, and basically shift the carriage right, shift the carriage left, shift the carriage right, shift the carriage left. Really super simple that way, and that's a nice way to do that.
And I do it for time. Again, 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yep.
And you can have them do it at home if they have a ball that they can use at home. It's a pretty easy way to do it. And I've even had people do it at their desks. I have them buy like a Dynadisc or flatten a Togu ball or a Pilates ball so they can sit on it. So it gives them a little bit of buoyancy and just shift side to side to side to side to side to side. And believe it or not, they say, wow, it gets tired.
Yes.
And after about a minute and a half, you can see they're not doing the same range of motion anymore. And it's almost funny to watch their face because they're like, they forgot how to do it. Their body's not, their brain's saying work, but it's not working anymore. And it just gets so fatigued.
Yeah.
And you just have to get that to have a lot more, not only strength, but endurance.
Yeah, I do that, again, in a Pilates environment, sitting sideways on the reformer. There's mermaid exercise called mermaid, which is the classic side exercise there. But I'll do it with the feet on the floor, again, with a 14-inch reformer, and a hand on the foot bar.
Yep.
And again, I may have light springs, I may have no springs. And again, so the feet are stable, pushing the hips over, pushing the carriage over, and then a side bend toward the hand that's on the foot bar. And then coming back, find the range that's really comfortable there. Another one that tends to be comfortable for a lot of people with other issues, and I can keep them very in the frontal plane. If I want to really just focus on that, I can minimize rotation or I can add rotation, and I can make it really small or I can make it bigger. So lots of nice ways to make that dynamic.
And what I like about that is you have the progressions built in.
Yes, exactly.
You can add
and you can just talk them through it.
Yeah,
exactly.
I like
easy
that.
to just build it up.
Yep.
One other challenge that I find is, and I bring this up because it's another exercise I see a lot for the dynamic QL that I find both great and problematic, which is basically standing, let's say, on a small box or a block and just doing a hip drop and a hip lift.
Yep.
And while I like the idea of that exercise, I find if somebody has a sacroiliac joint problem, if somebody has a piriformis problem, if somebody has a disc issue,
Yes.
man, can that irritate it fast.
I,
So,
oh,
yeah.
I completely
Okay.
agree. I have seen
Yeah.
that because I see a lot of people, they come into me and if they've had this issue, that's one of their exercises. Or if they need to get
Yes.
they need to strengthen their gluteus medius. And yes, that's a
Yes.
gluteus medius strengthener and it is a hip hike. But like you said, if they upslip to that side,
Yeah. If there's any instability in there anywhere.
you're asking them to immediately go into
Yeah.
that. And you're just going to
Yeah.
exacerbate the condition.
Yeah.
I am not a fan of that exercise whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's too many variables that can take it in the wrong direction with that, especially doing it at home for them.
Yeah. That do. I mean, again, this is one of those exercises where, Brian and I have done this long enough that we've tested all these things out over the years. And that one, man, I am just, every now and then it will be the perfect exercise for
Yeah.
somebody. Which is great, but boy, it's not a first go-to. It's not a second go-to. It's down the line.
Yep.
And sometimes I'll do it I'll do it differently where they just stand and just try to float their foot a quarter inch off the floor.
Yep.
Like a tiny, tiny, tiny hip hike. And because I find what's particularly problematic is the drop down.
Yeah.
Right. So going below neutral with that standing leg below the ground, essentially, because you're standing on a block, and that lift up. So a lot of times I'll just say start on the floor and just a tiny little hip hike. Sometimes
Yep.
sometimes I can work with that safely, but man, the full drop of the hip is like,
Yeah.
seems to cause shearing forces.
Yeah. I've seen too many injuries from that.
Yeah, me too.
That it's not worth it. And,
Yeah, agreed.
And something that I've always mentioned to my trainers here is what's the risk reward?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
If there's too much risk,
is it worth it?
Yeah. There's
100 ways to do something.
Thank you. Exactly.
Do it a different way.
Find another way. If you're working QL, there's another way. If you're trying to work the gluteus medius, I can give you 10,000 gluteus medius exercises that won't have the same effect as that one does.
Exactly.
And the same risk, the chance of risk. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that one because it's one that I've taken out of my brain. I can't tell you the last time I've asked someone to do that because I just think it's too risky a maneuver.
Yeah, I'm actually with you. It's just I wanted to bring it up because I know I've seen it a lot, and I don't teach it, and I don't do it for that reason. And it's like, okay, let's just bring that up.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think about doing something? We've talked about side sit-ups, which again we can do it on the arc. We can do it on a large
ball, bolster,
everything,
big ball.
Yeah, so many different ways we can do it. That's a great way to stimulate those tissues.
Yes.
What do you feel about side planks? How do you feel about those?
I am a big fan of side planks because people tend to get so weak there in the whole side body, right? It's not just the dynamic ability to actually flex and laterally flex the spine, but just the whole side body. And I'll modify it like mad.
Yeah.
I'll be on the forearm with the knees on the ground, right? Or like the lower leg on the ground, do a tiny little, the mini one, the modified version of a side plank.
Yep.
I also find, once you're getting into that side body, it's not just the QL that feeds directly into the abductors and the strength or weakness thereof.
Yep.
Right. And so, and whether you're doing it for just pure stability and just like up and down, up and down, up and down, or going up and then doing a little what you were talking about of dropping those hips and coming back, creating a more dynamic action. Right. Again, in that modified version with the plank on and, with the forearm on the ground and probably the knees and the lower leg on the ground as well. Those are, I think they're fabulous. And again, sometimes with a client, I'll put my hands at their limiting point, only drop to my hand and it's an inch and then come back and drop because I know if they go past that, they sometimes can't come back.
Yeah.
If they're really weak. Right. And I think that builds up that whole side body beautifully.
And what I've noticed, not only on my own body, but on clients, is one side will often be a lot stronger than the other. We see an imbalance here.
A lot.
I love the side plank because it demonstrates that imbalance.
Yes.
And if you just do a plank, for instance, my own body, I can do multiple minutes without even thinking. It's not that difficult. But a side plank on the side that my QL is a little bit testy.
Yep.
I can do about half the time that I can on
Yep.
my, stronger side. And I
Yep.
know it. I mean, I can feel the difference. I had a client
Yes.
today. He said, I feel like these are two different bodies. Said one side, I
Yes.
feel like I can do this all day. The other side, after 10 seconds, he's shaking.
Absolutely.
And it's like, okay, you're done. Okay, pause. Let's try it again in a second. And just the
Yeah.
weakness is there. So you can see that even in a regular plank, chances are one side is probably working 60-40 to the weaker side even.
Or sometimes for me, because if I don't, now I'm quite consistent, but if I wouldn't do stuff for my left side, I mean, literally, I could not do a side plank on that side because I got so weak.
Wow.
Just from not doing stuff, just because I've got leg length difference and other kinds of things. If I do it, I'm good. But man, I've got to keep that side up. And you also think about 3-dimensional core support. Going back to low back pain 101, 3-dimensional core support, front, back, and side.
Yes.
And if you don't have that, that's going to put unequal forces through the spine, through the hips, through the whole structure.
Yep.
So no, I love it. Love the side plank. Big fan.
Another exercise I'm just going to throw out there for everybody that I like unilateral loading.
Yes.
So oftentimes I will load, put a tube, put a band, something around a stationary object, walk sideways to it, arms extended. So you're derotating. So you are getting that QL, you are getting the oblique, you're getting the entire torso. But what I find is if you take the hands from a straight arm position in front, take them overhead, suddenly now you're basically holding a side plank in a standing position. So it challenges it differently. And as you're moving through that arc from being in front to overhead, you're changing the angles constantly.
Oh, I like that.
So
that's cool.
It's just one of those things that you can wake the muscle up. And again, you can make it easy. If they can't do a side plank on the ground, I can take a light yellow band and only have them basically holding up 3 to 4 pounds. It's not much.
Right, barely putting tension on it.
Right. And take it overhead. And even when I take it overhead, sometimes I'll just start tapping the band so you get a little bit of that a little bit of perturbation going on.
Yes.
And it just wakes things up so we can get more strength and then begin to progress them from there so that I can have them do something like a side plank down the road. This is for people who that can't. But I'll also take my big, strong guys, put a heavier resistance there. As soon as they go overhead, you see them toppling over and they have to really anchor themselves and they say, wow, I can't believe how hard that is.
Yeah, nice.
So just another option to think about.
I love it. Ways to do it through mobility, like a lot of the mermaids and Pilates, and ways to do it through stability.
Yep.
All the side plank work. And I love doing a vertical version or an upright version of a side plank, challenging the stability of the sides, right? The whole side body, but from an upright position. That's fabulous.
Yeah. So just some different things to think about, gang. Now listen,
love it.
That was part one. We got lots more.
Part one. We haven't even gotten into the piriformis.
We haven't even gotten into the piriformis. And then we want to get 3-dimensional about this. We want to see the body in motion and not just think like a lot of people do about specific body parts or breaking it down into just one thing. Let's put it all together. Let's make it 3-dimensional. Let's have the exercises.
The whole body.
Yeah, we're going to work it the whole thing. So we're going to get that in our next episode. So part 2 is coming up next time. So thank you guys for joining us. Our social media stuff, again, at movingcombos@gmail.com. Moving Combos on Instagram, on Twitter. Come check us out. And yeah, from North St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We will see you next time.
Bye, guys.